one of the stronger female characters that I felt I've encountered in a game was in something recently that was just Home Alone. And then it felt like you were actually involved in a story that actually dealt with gender issues in an interesting way that, people really, I think, stuck to,
I will stop you. Did you call it Home Alone?
Yeah, my bad.
Gone home.
Yes, my fault. Hey, it's
right.
early.
I was hoping we were going to let that one go.
I
was like,
really
everyone knows what he's talking about.
I was going to try.
I've got an image of Joe Pesci just wandering around the house finding out about his sister.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like such a horrible person for interrupting. I'm like, you're making a really intelligent point, and I really like everything you're saying. However, the editor in my brain is like, wrong game title, wrong title, wrong title, wrong title, wrong title, wrong title.
And my luck is that's what will be written, and the correction will be, oh, don't, I meant gone home. That would be edited out. And so,
that would be an interesting game, actually. You play Macaulay Culkin setting up traps for the burglars.
It would have been a better game had he learned something about his sexuality along the way, probably. But
there was an old. There have been licensed Home Alone games, but we're talking like oldie days, like Super Nintendo stuff. I remember there was one in a hospital once when I had a friend who had an appendix taken out. I don't know why I link video games with weird medical and psychological trauma issues, but that's how I remember games. So I remember Super Nintendo in a hospital. I remember Super Mario Brothers 3 linked to depression, and Abe's Exodus with Jake the Snake attacking me in an alleyway. But one point you brought up there when you mentioned about how people were calling Lara Croft a role model, and how you if that were a film, which, I mean, funnily enough, it is a series of films now as well, how that would be laughed out of a serious sort of film discussion. That's something I've said a few times about various games, where I feel like almost like the video game industry and the game media attached is so desperate to have their moment of legitimacy that they will glom onto anything, even if it is vastly inferior. For me personally, that was always evident in the reaction to Heavy Rain, where people said this is the true moment where video games have their cinematic masterpiece. And I'm like, if that were a film, like Roger Ebert would just be crying with laughter in his seats. And I don't feel like the game industry is quite there yet, but I don't feel that's anything to be ashamed of. Which I feel
that's exactly why Gone Home was such a good story in that medium, though, because it played to gaming's strengths rather than its weaknesses. Yeah. And it told the story in a way that only a video game can do.
I think that's it. Rather than sort of hinge on Hollywood pretensions and whatnot, they incorporated video game design into their story, because too many games keep it separate.
Yeah, well, they focused, I think, on a critical kernel that in many ways hadn't been proven yet, which is really focused on great character development, focused on more of the principles that go with traditional screenwriting when it comes to what makes a character more engaging. And I think what we've seen to a large degree throughout the industry, I mean, there's so many games, I can't speak for all games, there's a lot I haven't seen, but for the most part, what we've been doing is sort of reverse engineering a little bit of character development on top of a character that we know is going to perform certain actions repetitively 99% of the time. And when something like Gone Home separates out of that model where it's not about action, it's about really story discovery. And we could say the same for Myst, adding puzzles, right? But being an actual relevant, good, decent story, Gone Home. And in the context of games, your point of we really tend to inflate our minor successes. I think that's totally true, and probably also totally necessary, because we really should hail every minor success in that direction. But what's happened traditionally, I think, with screenwriters is we bring in screenwriters and they're trying to write a film. And most of them don't really understand games, and that's happening better and better. I think that's happening better with Grand Theft Auto 5.
I can picture them trying to explain it. So basically, at the end of every scene, you have to make it end in a big fight somehow. Right? How the fuck do you actually write that? Yeah. You have to make it end in a fight, and you have to write the story into an arena.
Well, I think that is why most people compare video games to If it were analogous to the film industry, it would be nothing but Michael Bay films at the moment, because they have that, well, everything has to end in a fight. And only recently we're kind of more embracing on a wider scale this idea that no, not every game does have to have a big fight in it.
Yeah.
That's what really I loved about Gone Home, because I didn't know anything about that game coming into it, like nothing. And I thought I was playing a horror game. I was like, when is the boogeyman going to jump out at me? And that made it almost a more interesting experience. I know a lot of people didn't like that game, but...
Well, of course people don't like it. It's not a game. You don't do anything. There's no win state. There's no lose state. It's not a video game. It's a video game, people, and it's a really good one at that. So, yeah.
I don't really understand why people want to be so pedantic over that. I mean, it's interactive entertainment, and the closest thing it would ever be is to a video game.
Because it's not the kind of video games that they want. Shh, that's a big secret. Don't tell anyone.
But here's what's really the great thing. Just to comment on that, the great thing is that if the stores were deciding what they were going to put on their shelf or not, we never would have seen Gone Home. That's my personal opinion. Yeah. But because it was able to find an audience through digital distribution, and because it was able to be spread by word of mouth and still be available in the time that it took for that to spread, which would not have happened on the retail shelf, because it would have been off the shelf even if it got there in the first place, long before it had a chance for people to go, wow, this is something interesting. My friends should try this. So if it took them weeks or months to discover it, it was still on a path. So you had a life cycle, closer to a year of discovery for audience, which never could have happened in the old environment where you were dealing with a physical disc. And I think what's great about that is that they don't require Walmart to say yes or no, I'll carry this game, right? And I mean that in a metaphorical sense, using Walmart as the biggest brand, that distributes a lot of stuff here in the States. But if they didn't want your game, what's the chances that a publisher's interested in your game who's going to be distributing discs? So the world today, they're able to show their chops. I mean, I really commend that team, because you had just a few people taking a complete risk. They didn't have any real comparables that said this is what's going to be successful. And in many ways, they, in my opinion, across all spectrums of the genre that, in a sense, they're trying to create, they did an above adequate job. And I don't mean like they did this stellar job. I mean, for what they were targeting, and I believe it was only 5 people working on it, but they did an above adequate job defining some new space that totally resonated with an audience. And when I looked at it back when, it was at 250,000 sales. And when you applied that across the cost of the game, it really makes sense for 5 people to do that, right? it added up, and now they've got a budget going forward. And what's funny, because you see the Hollywood agents immediately trying to jump on them and go get 10% out of the next deal they can cut somewhere.
Yeah,
which the company does not need. That team doesn't need that.
Yeah.
No.
We've seen what they can do with a bigger budget as well, because Minerva's Den was fantastic.
Definitely.
Yeah, they did do the BioShock deal. So,
I feel bad, because people listening to this show, this episode has gone far more serious and intelligent than we normally do. I feel like we need to dumb it down. We need to dumb it down and make it a bit more lowbrow.
It's good.
No, people like things to never change and to stay the same forever. So I'm going to take matters into my own hands here, and I'm going to dumb this show down for us. So intelligent discussion of Gone Home. Let's put that to one side.